All right. So there we go. We are recording. Like I said, our objective is to explain the causes and effects of the end of the Cold War and the legacy that the Cold War will have on the United States. Dun, dun, dun. Big hint, big legacy. We have some new key terms to talk about, and of course, we're going to go ahead and begin here. So we got a primary source to show a little bit at the end, pretty famous stuff. Beginning of the not-so-Cold War. Yeah, pretty much. In fact, there's going to be there's a couple of highlights from today's lesson. One is space lasers that we'll talk about in a little bit. No more core gets cold weather. Well, that's the thing. Yeah, there's going to be space lasers. We'll talk about the space lasers, but not aliens, but space lasers. And then the other thing that we'll talk about is how after the Cold War ends, America kind of feels empty inside, like how there's nothing left. And we'll talk about that too. And it'll lead into next week's last couple of lessons when we talk about what it's like Americans fighting war. Yeah. Oh man, the amount of people that I know in life, Roman, that may or may not have said a sentence very similar to what you're saying without any joke in there concerns me. But okay, let's get started with this end of the Cold War. No more cold. Cold is gone. It'll never be cold again. Just kidding. It was snowing a few months ago. Key point one, first, the lukewarm war. I like that. We should have a lukewarm war. Reagan asserted U.S. opposition to communism through various speeches, diplomatic efforts, military interventions, and a buildup of nuclear as well as conventional weapons. So basically, Reagan's very what they would say is tough on communism, right? Reagan's not a big fan of communism, and he will fight it and bicker with it and argue with it and debate it every single chance he gets. When he talks about the Soviet Union, if he's not directly talking trash to them, he's backhanded complimenting them. And when I give you that little clip of Reagan giving the speech at Berlin, you should see what I mean. We'll do that near the end, though. So again, very anti-communist. I'll give you a quick minute. I don't think we need too much time on here, so I'll give you about a minute and a half for this one. And then we'll move forward. I'm still chuckling at the lukewarm war. Half hot, half cold. That's another good one. Half hot, half cold one. The war, just the war. No temperature at all. All right, so let's go ahead and move forward and let's get into some of the Cold War things that happened that we haven't talked about. So it's been a little while since we've actually talked about the war, the Cold War, the lukewarm war, all this stuff. And it's funny that we made all these temperature references earlier because before I get into the specifics of what's on the slide, right, the Cold War itself, it happens in cycles. So there are points like during Korea or during the Cuban Missile Crisis where the war is at a peak. It's really, really hot. It's not that cold. It's warm. It's seasonal wars, kind of. It's really, really tense. It's really tense. At any point, nukes and bullets can start flying, right? There's points like that. And then there's points where it's ice cold, where nothing's happening. These periods where the war is cooling down are known as détente. And I say that now to bring in, prior to Reagan, under President Nixon, there was a period of détente that had been going on for quite a while. The Soviets kind of liked Nixon. Nixon kind of wanted to piece things out. But when Jimmy Carter was elected and through Jimmy Carter's presidency, that détente kind of went away. The tensions rose again. And then when Reagan becomes president, he uses every chance he gets to tell everybody that the Soviet Union's not good. They're not reliable. He refers to them as an evil empire. He even goes as far as to say that they were about to collapse, like their entire government's about to collapse. They're unstable. But even when he's bashing them at every chance he gets, he's still a very diplomatic leader. And he's still able to maintain all these relationships with a lot of other countries. Something that like Jimmy Carter and stuff, they weren't as good at. And that's going to shape how the world kind of sees the Soviet Union moving forward. There's also other reasons that this happens. The Soviet Union is going to start having struggles in the 80s. And then there's going to be a book that comes out in, I believe, the 70s called The Gulag Archipelago. And it's when the political prisoners and people that have been arrested in the Soviet Union for doing nothing, like, hey, you doctor, you're a doctor, you're real smart, prison, right? Those people, some of them get out and they write about what's happening in the Soviet Union. And when people start reading it, they start freaking out. And so people start to realize that there's things like prison camps and stuff in the Soviet Union. They didn't quite know it early on. About a minute or change on this first slide about kind of the overall nature of the Cold War or the seasonal wars or whatever you would like to call them, the lukewarm. Yeah, witch hunts are very common. They tend to take different forms. They're not always, but the concept of the witch hunt, the idea of like, get them, it's always a thing. Salem type. Yeah, but it's true. Yeah, that's a pretty common occurrence. And you just got to be careful with some of that stuff because, but yeah, the theme of finding the people that are doing wrong, it happens a lot. Especially though, I will say it happens more in places like the Soviet Union where there's like totalitarians in charge. I would like to think it happens a lot less here and in places like here being the US. But in places like the Soviet Union, if Stalin didn't trust you, he locked you in prison forever, and he could, right? Like here, it's really hard for the president to do. The president can't do stuff like that. At least they're not supposed to be able to. All right, let's move forward. Let's talk about some of the other advancements. So that's what's going on the American side. Different presidents have different relationships with the Soviet Union. Nixon had détente, Carter made everybody mad again, and then Reagan's here being kind of aggressive. But in the Soviet Union, there's a new leader taking hold. His name is Mikhail Gorbachev. And Gorbachev is a reformer. He wants to change the Soviet Union. He doesn't want to lock up people in prison just because they're doctors and because they're good doctors, right? Side note, one of the things people say killed Stalin is that there were no good doctors in the Soviet Union, and what he died of, which it escapes me. I think it wasn't an aneurysm, but it was something aneurysm-like. And he was just sitting in bed dying, and there was no one around to help him. And all the doctors that were around were scared to help him because if they failed, they were worried they would get locked in prison. That's a side note of it. Again, Death of Stalin, great movie. And also there's some reports that Khrushchev may or may not have like helped him, but that's another thing. But the point is that Soviet Union, for a long time, was a rough place to be. And Gorbachev wants to reform that. He has two main policies that he hopes will do that. One is called Glasnost. And Glasnost was an attempt to bring more political freedom to Soviet citizens. So the idea that if you're a Soviet citizen, you can wander around and be like, hey, is Gorbachev doing a good job? And not get arrested and thrown in prison. That's kind of what they're referring to. You don't really need to know more than just it's, hey, political freedom, right? That's about all you need to know about that. And then the Perestroika plan or platform that he had also was about introducing limited examples of free market practices in the Soviet economy. Basically, the communist economy, not going well, not really working. So introducing pieces of free market practices, currency, other little things like that to kind of help bring that along. So those are his two major ways that he's reforming the Soviet Union. I was about to say the United States. No, he's reforming the Soviet Union. About a minute left on the clock. Talk about Gorbachev and the good old Soviet reformer that he was. "30 seconds. What's that thing? I think that's just a birthmark. Yeah, no one spilled coffee on him. I believe it is just a birthmark. Spilled coffee, that's so mean. No, I think that's just like a mark he's got, yeah. Because he's had, if you look at younger pictures of him, he has it. Even when he has hair, you can see it kind of peeking out. And when you look at pictures of him really old, he still has it. So I'm pretty sure it's a birthmark. I do not know enough about Gorbachev to tell you, like, definitely, but I would say, yeah, birthmark from what I can tell just looking at it. It's like one of those big liver spots, but it's just giant. Okay, so let's talk about deals and doctrines. Doctrines. Okay, so the INF agreement signed by Gorbachev. See, look, here's Gorbachev. You can see this thing still on his head. And this is a younger Gorbachev with a shinier head. In agreement, basically the INF agreement, both parties agreed to destroy their intermediate range missiles. So it's a specific class of missile that is like middle range, I believe, that's supposed to be able to, that can directly hit like the Soviet Union from bases that the US has and the US from bases the Soviet Union has. Freshly polished. Yeah, freshly polished dope. Gorbachev also removes troops from Afghanistan. So both countries destroy their intermediate range missiles and Gorbachev removes troops from Afghanistan. Next, you get something called the Reagan Doctrine. Now, the Reagan Doctrine is Reagan's Cold War policy. And we talked about this when we first talked about the Cold War, about how the U.S. doesn't care what type of leader you are, right? Like in the 50s, they're removing leaders all the time that were democratically elected. But Reagan specifically supports any regime, democratically elected, totalitarian. He doesn't care what type of leader you are so long as you are not a communist. If you're not a communist, Reagan's got your back, and he will support you in anything you do as long as you're not being communist, as long as you're anti-communist. That's called the Reagan Doctrine. We'll get into the specifics of a couple of countries where he Reagan doctrines it up, and it does not necessarily go well, specifically Nicaragua, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But again, the Reagan Doctrine is the idea that the U.S. is going to support anybody if they're not a communist, regardless of whether or not they're a dictator, regardless of whether or not they're committing war crimes for a little while, as long as it doesn't make us look too bad. And eventually when it does, we kind of like, oh, that's not what we wanted you to do, and then we step away from it. But for a while, that's what we're doing. About a minute on the clock. Little less than 20 seconds. All right. So let's talk about Nicaragua. In 1979, this country became communist. Oh no, America's greatest fear. Under a coup that was led by a group called the Sandinistas. And once they took control of the country and made it communist, the U.S. was like, not good. No, backtrack, right? And so they funded and trained a military group known as the Contras to overthrow them. But as the Contras went around doing what they were doing, they were committing all sorts of horrible atrocities. I put abusive on the slides. That is selling it lightly. They commit all sorts of crazy crimes. And eventually Congress will end U.S. involvement with the Contras because while we don't mind supporting bad guys, these guys are a little too much of a bad guy, and they're really public about it. And it's almost the 80s, and people can see this stuff. And so the Contras will be we step away from them. We don't want to deal with them anymore. Kind of. So basically that's exactly the type of thing that they're trying to avoid. And it's just crazy how blind they can be to it. I'm trying to see if I can pull up there's a specific image that I might not be able to find where the Contras are just like doing horrible stuff. No, all I can find is one of them capturing somebody. But yeah, they used to like burn villages and stuff. Not great. Not great. You don't want to be friends with the Contras once they start doing what they're doing. And we may or may not have trained them. But again, we trained Bin Laden too, right? So all in the name of no communism, right? All right, let's move forward. Let's talk about the Iran-Contra affair. Now, this is going to be one of the bigger stains on Reagan's presidency. This is going to be one of the things that he gets a little in trouble for, even during his time, which it was rare because, again, everybody liked him. Basically, Iran and Iraq are at war. And in the 80s, the U.S. will sell weapons to the Iranian Contras to kind of help them out, right? And the Reagan administration will take the money they earn from there and use them to train the Contras that are in Nicaragua. And the Reagan administration violates the Constitution directly, breaks one of the biggest rules of being a president, which is you do not control funds. Congress controls funds. And it's illegal. It's straight up illegal. There was trials held, and it was found and ruled that Reagan was cleared of any illegal action. He did nothing illegal because he didn't do this. People in his administration did. He didn't know what was happening. Now, some of Reagan's critics will kind of split on this. The ones that buy into the decision will say that, oh, well, he's unaware of what's going on in his cabinet, right? This is later in his presidency. People will say that. And the ones who don't, the ones who think that he did something wrong and didn't get caught, will call him Teflon. You guys don't know what Teflon is? It's like non-stick material. It's what they put on non-stick pans because nothing can stick to them. So basically, there's going to be two groups of critics, right? The critics that think he did something wrong and didn't get caught, and the critics who think he just didn't know what was going on in his cabinet, and that's not good because you're a president. You should know that thing. Not his cabinet, in his administration. I'm sorry. So again, the Iran-Contra affair, make sure you define it. It is a big deal, important. All right, let's go to move forward. Key point number 2 is up on the slide. And basically, because of increased U.S. military spending, Reagan's initiatives, as well as political changes and economic problems in Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union will have a lot of immense struggles. And all these reasons are why the Cold War will end. So part of it is Reagan's platforms. Part of it is the U.S. military being like a massive spending black hole almost. But another part of it is Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union just having political and economic trouble. And all these things happening at once within the same little period of time are why the Cold War will end. I'll give you just under 2 minutes for this, probably around a minute and a half with a little extra change. And then we'll move on and talk about some of that stuff. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten. We will get to the space lasers. That is a thing. About 45 seconds left on the clock. All right, a little less than 10 seconds, and then we're going to move forward. So let's talk about military spending. Again, Reagan loves spending money on the military, so much so that he disregards his own cut federal spending platform by cutting federal spending in some places like public transportation and welfare, and spending way more than anybody before him in places like the military and defense. They'll develop new conventional weapons like the B-1 bomber or the MX missile, as well as double the size of the U.S. Navy. The fleet, they expanded from like around 300 ships to well over 600. He basically spends billions and billions of dollars on defense while he's president. Reagan will leave office before the Cold War ends. George H.W. Bush, Papa Bush, will be the president when the Cold War ends, but it's the Reagan policies that help make the Cold War end, along with the struggles going on in the Soviet Union. So I'll give you about a minute for that. I would name, if anything, the bomber and the missile. And then, like, you just kind of need to get the concept right of, like, they're developing new things. It's not just spending money on the same old stuff. Technology is changing rapidly, especially military technology. About 20 seconds. All right, let's move forward. Let's talk about some space lasers. So, something called the SDI, or the Strategic Defense Initiative. It was something Ronald Reagan really believed in and really wanted and really loved and spent billions of dollars on. And it's basically this idea that you can put military-grade satellites in space, fix them with very certain high-powered lasers, and use them to shoot down missiles as they were being launched while the missiles were in the atmosphere. Star Wars, but real, kind of. So the critics of this plan and all the money he's spending on it will call it Star Wars. They'll be like, "Oh, is that Reagan's crazy Star Wars plan?" Like, that's what they call it. That's a real term, political term, I guess, criticism of the SDI is it's called Star Wars. But the defense budget will jump from 170 billion to over 300 billion, and not all of that went to this, but a good chunk of it did. Reagan believed in this thing tooth and nail and fought for it. Mutually assured destruction, that was called. Right, the mutually assured destruction is the Cold War, right? The idea that everybody's got thousands of nukes and we can shoot them at each other whenever. But this space laser plan wasn't designed to necessarily hurt the Soviet Union, but protect the United States. When the Soviet Union launches a missile towards us, we can destroy it with the space laser while it is still in orbit, nuke the moon. I had one person say that did they think the nuke would follow the laser like a cat? And I can't stop visualizing that. And now I kind of wish a nuke would follow around a laser like a cat. But yeah, essentially, they don't put the lasers in space, but they basically would blow them up while they were in the sky. Who knows what that would do to the atmosphere or the environment? Probably not good things, but, you know, like that's all they got. And I think I could be wrong, but you're not detonating the nuke, you're destroying the missile. But I don't know the details of it enough. It never really got off the ground, as you could probably guess. We don't have space lasers in the sky, but Reagan spent billions of dollars trying to make some. And it's a weird little Cold War thing that comes up because, you know, we won the space race. So space was a thing for a while. And in fact, space is only a thing now because of like SpaceX and stuff. So that's pretty cool. About a minute on this space lasers, SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative. But yeah, no aliens that we know of. Zero, zero. Fair enough. I mean, that's the one thing I would love to like go forward 100 years and read some of the declassified stuff from these Reagan years, because Lord only knows what sort of nonsense was going on, you know? How all the space lasers worked, or about how they didn't work, and how the best thing they could do with a laser was cook pizza or something, read a DVD. I'd love to find out all that stuff. I actually don't even think I'm sure there's lasers hot enough to cook pizza. What is it, like 900? Yeah, like 900 degrees. You can probably cook pizza on most lasers. I don't know. As you can see, guys, when we get into the high-tech science stuff, I tend to not know as much about what I'm talking about. But lasers happen because science and stuff, you know. All right. Yeah, Back to the Future. Yeah, that's true. Dehydrated meals. That was a thing. And didn't the DeLorean, it ran on garbage, right? He would just put trash in it, and then it would compact into fuel. I remember that too. Love that movie. Okay. Trash to fuel. Yeah, exactly. Last key point number 3. I want those shoes. Oh, the ones from Back to the Future 2? The sweet future shoes that he's on the hoverboard on? Didn't Nike release some of those? Weren't they like super expensive? Because I know Pepsi released like the crazy weird bottles from Back to the Future 2 a while back. Yeah, but they don't self-adjust. That makes sense. That's a bummer. Yeah, that's cool. That's a good movie. You guys have good taste in movies. I think y'all are the first class that I've had that like in general has good taste in movies, like y'all's class. Because most of my other classes rough taste in movies. At least when we talked about it. Okay, I'm going to stop talking about movies now because I just realized that's not relevant. Let's talk about key point 3. The end of the Cold War will lead to new diplomatic relationships, but it will also lead to U.S. military peacekeeping interventions. as well as debates over the appropriate use of American power in the world. I can neither confirm nor deny that. But basically what's going to happen, guys, is the Cold War is going to end. The Soviet Union is going to collapse. And all of this military might and power that has literally had billions of dollars spent on it has nothing to do. The CIA, all these groups that like were spies for, they have nothing to do, no one to spy on. And it makes this kind of vacuum, right? America kind of feels empty and lonely. They don't have their big bad guy to compete with anymore. And it's going to be an issue. Like, it's an issue underground, but it's something when you look back, you realize, oh, that was a problem. We had all this stuff built in to fight this Cold War that never happened. And then it just ended. And it's going to be a thing. So we'll get into it in a bit. I'm going to give you about a minute and a half for this last key point. And then we'll get into some of the stuff happening in the Soviet Union and why everything kind of collapsed on them. Ironically, watch this crazy. Might do on the US president. Exactly. He's like, I got space lasers. What do I do with them now? Even though he didn't really have space lasers, but it's a weird circumstance where the U.S. has all of this military might and power and all of these safeguards and things in place, and then they don't need them. Like with the snap of a finger, like no one saw it happening, and so they're in an odd spot, to say the least. And we'll talk a little bit about how society changes around that and how it kind of, and then we'll get into some terrorism stuff, and then we'll probably close out the unit, and then we'll get into review. Time to accidentally lose thing. Oh boy, don't even get me started. Remember, there's so many nukes lost by the U.S. There's a name for it. It's called a broken arrow. Keep that in mind. Well, I think GPS too was developed by the military. Now everybody has it. All right, let's go ahead and move forward. Misplaced by $1 million nuke, exactly. That could blow up the world a little bit. So this is a long slide. I'll give you plenty of time for it. But by 1988, the Soviet Union is falling apart. So throughout the 80s, the Soviet Union is falling apart because of what's going on in Eastern Europe. Basically, the people in a lot of Eastern European countries are outright challenging the Soviet Union's authority. They want elections. They want to vote out the communist governments. And once those communist governments no longer have support from the Soviet military, because Gorbachev removes troops in a lot of those places, those countries will lose their communist alignment. It starts in 1989 with Poland, who elects a non-communist leader. And soon after that, all these other communist bloc, these Eastern Bloc nations that have been held by the Soviet Union since World War II, one by one, like dominoes, dun, 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 they all fall. And they don't fall, but they all vote out their communist leaders and replace them with other types of leaders. This even happens in East Germany, and East Germans will tear down the Berlin Wall in 89-ish. And then the Soviet Union itself, the government, will fall in 1991, and the Cold War is officially over. Once the war is over, new diplomatic efforts will be made in the new Russia. Is that true? Is that a real factoid that you just put in the chat? I feel like the USSR, I mean, I can't speak to this. I don't know. That is really interesting. But you wouldn't want to live in a world with the Soviet Union locking people in prison for stuff. That's a weird little fact. I did not know that. With the invention of some of the questionable Pokemon? What do you mean? I don't know what you mean by questionable Pokemon. But Pokemon, they're like little animals and stuff. Oh, yeah, never mind. I see what I did there. You're right. Need time machine. You're gonna redecorate your room. I don't even want to know what the shotgun's for. All right, guys. About another minute and a half. Again, I just want to make sure you have time to get this info down. There's a lot of info here about Soviet decline. A chainsaw. Wow. Got a doomslayer over here. Breaking out the saw. About a minute left on the clock. I do have a primary source to show you after this next slide. A little bit of Reagan talk. It's only like 2 minutes. There's a longer version of the Reagan speech if you guys are interested in hearing Ronald Reagan talk about communism for 30 minutes. But I didn't want to subject you all to a full 30-minute speech from the president. We also don't have time to do it. So instead, I picked a 2-minute section that's very popular and very famous, so you guys could hear it, because I think some of that stuff's important. That's what's cool about this era now, right? And everything's on TV now. We can see and review a lot of this stuff. 30 seconds. All right, so let's move on. So, U.S.-Russia relations. Soviet Union's dead and gone, so Russia, the new nation of Russia, will take hold, right? And the U.S. and Russia agreed to a couple of treaties. The first one's called the START I Treaty. And both countries agreed to reduce their number of nuclear weapons they possessed, first down to 10,000, and then later down to 3,000. So, hey, Soviet Union and the U.S. can only blow up the world about 50 times each now instead of a couple of hundred. So, progress. But their numbers of nukes are reduced. And then under the START II treaty, the U.S. also offers funds to Russia to help fix their economy, because their economy is unstable after the Soviet Union collapsed. So yes, let's only be able to blow the whole world up 50 times instead of a few hundred. And let's try to help Russia's economy get off the ground so there's no temptation to try to blow the world up and things like that. This is U.S.-Russia relations. And then this is about where we will stop as far as slides go. So I'll give you a quick minute, and then we'll show that primary source, and then we'll talk about what we are doing to close out the class. Well, you mean U.S.-Russia relations? Yeah, it's not been great. It was okay for a while, but, much like how the guy that was in Ho Chi Minh, the communist leader from Vietnam, really, really, really wanted to be friends with America, and no one told Truman. Like, stuff just happens, guys. Stuff happens sometimes. Like, he wrote letters to Truman being like, look, I know I'm a communist. I know you don't like the Soviet Union, but we'd much rather be friends with you than the Soviets. Like, please don't be jerks. Don't help the French. And no one gave those letters to President Truman. Yeah, it's true. It's true. No, my favorite Biden line so far has been there is no red states, there is no blue states, there is a United States. I was like, as you can see, guys, I love America. When you fell on the stairs, that was funny. Gio showed me one where it was Trump golfing, and then the golf ball hit Biden. It's a love-hate. Yeah, that's usually how America goes. It's a little love, little hate. Again, right, the way I always like to describe America, it's got really good ingredients, and it makes a really good pie. The only problem is we got to make sure everybody gets their fair piece of the pie. And we don't always do that, but we do better than most, I would argue. And again, the ingredients are some of the best parts. I have with the bananas. I saw the banana peel one too, the Mario Kart one. That one's also very funny. The internet's a fun place. Okay. Yeah, I saw that one. That one made me laugh. All right, let's talk about primary sources. So what I'm about to play for you guys, and I actually need to stop the share really quick so I can do it. New share with sound. There we go. Okay. So this is a primary source, of course. This is Ronald Reagan giving a speech in Berlin. But the cool thing about this Ronald Reagan speech, that's your exit ticket, spoilers. It's a very famous one, and you guys have probably heard the speech, kind of like the Nixon one. Well, people of America got to know if their president's a crook. I'm not a crook. It's like that, kind of. It's that level of famous, probably a little more famous, but here it goes. Also, I want you to see if you can point out how much he's shading the Soviet Union while trying to sound nice. It's pretty great to look at.
Now the Soviets themselves may, in a limited way, be coming to understand the importance of freedom. We hear much from Moscow about a new policy of reform and openness.
Do you really only see teams? Okay, hold on. What did I do wrong? What about now? Does that look good? Okay. So here we go. Again, especially early on, like, I just love it. See if you can spot him trashing the Soviet Union while being nice. Super shady. In a fun way.
And now the Soviets themselves may, in a limited way, be coming to understand the importance of freedom. We hear much from Moscow about a new policy of reform and openness. Some political prisoners have been released. Certain foreign news broadcasts are no longer being jammed. Some economic enterprises have been permitted to operate with greater freedom from state control. Are these the beginnings of profound changes in the Soviet state, or are they token gestures intended to raise false hopes in the West or to strengthen the Soviet system without changing it? We welcome change and openness, for we believe that freedom and security go together, that the advance of human liberty can only strengthen the cause of world peace. There is one sign the Soviets can make that would be unmistakable, that would advance dramatically the cause of freedom and peace. General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
So that is Ronald Reagan giving his famous tear down this wall speech. That's like a 30-minute speech, but that's just like a real famous little section of it. So some of you guys, I saw you notice, like, if you seek civilization, you'll do this. And you guys notice any more of the shade like that he was throwing at the Soviets? Like, do you notice it where he's basically telling them, like, I know y'all hate freedom, but can you like freedom just once, this little bit for me, please? Like, right? He tells them all that stuff. It's a great little piece. So that is that little section. Again, it's my favorite part, right? You get to actually see this stuff now. We get to actually talk about it. Come on in. You want to come on in? We're about there. Okay.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall.
Yeah, exactly. See? So
spices.
That is it, though, guys. That is it for me. You've got about 5 minutes left. That should be enough time to answer a really brief exit ticket. It's on Google Classroom already. Reagan's Cold War strategy. Tell me about it. What did he do? What's happening in the Soviet Union during the 80s? Low-key disturbing. What's happening in the Soviet Union during the 80s? And then the third one, opinion. Why did the Cold War end? You tell me. You tell me. It's really hard to get that third one wrong. Like, you're going to have to be out of nowhere to get that third one wrong, because I want to know what you think ended the Cold War. But that is about it, guys. So.